You think love has rules? That it only happens between people from the same world, the same background, the same class? Then maybe you've never seen what happens when a billionaire falls in love with the daughter of his maid. The girl who grew up invisible, watching the world from behind a mop and bucket. This isn't just a romance. It's a story of scars, of second chances, of a girl who was always told she'd never be enough, and a man who had everything except meaning. When their lives collide, what follows is raw, uncomfortable, and painfully beautiful. Most people would say a millionaire like Ryan would never notice a girl like Emma. But they'd be wrong, because love doesn't look at bank accounts. It sees pain. It sees depth. And sometimes it sees a soul that mirrors your own, even if the world says you shouldn't belong together. Emma was the daughter of the help, silent, ashamed, and carrying wounds no one could see. Ryan lived in a mansion full of voices, but never felt heard. What brings these two broken people together isn't pity. It's a connection deeper than words, one that neither expected, but both desperately needed. There's betrayal, there's addiction, there's shame, but there's also redemption, mercy, and the kind of love that makes people uncomfortable because it breaks every social rule. But the truth? The most powerful stories aren't the ones that follow the rules. They're the ones that rewrite them. So, if you've ever felt unseen, unloved, or too broken to be chosen, this story might just change the way you look at yourself. And maybe, just maybe, it'll show you that your worth was never about where you came from, but about where you're meant to go. Because sometimes the most beautiful love stories are born in the places no one dares to look. Emily grew up in a mansion she could never call home. Her mother worked there as a housemaid, cleaning floors while Emily played silently in the corners. She wasn't allowed to sit at the fancy table or speak when the guests arrived. While the other kids wore designer clothes, Emily wore hand-me-downs that whispered of a different world. It was a life of shadows, where wealth surrounded her but never belonged to her. She knew luxury by sight, but never by touch. She was the maid's daughter, a title that followed her like a scar. Even at school, she was reminded of it. Her classmates lived in the same gated neighborhood, but none ever invited her over. It wasn't that she didn't exist, it's that she existed in a role already decided, one of service, one of silence, one of staying small. Emily learned early that invisibility wasn't just a feeling, it was an identity. Ryan, the son of the mansion's owner, barely noticed her. When they were younger, they shared a few innocent moments, maybe a glance, a word, but nothing more. To him, she was just part of the background. To her, he represented everything she was told she'd never be. The gap between them wasn't just economic, it was emotional. Emily learned how to smile politely while swallowing the ache of being unwanted. The rejection wasn't loud. It came in whispers, in glances, in locked doors. Every time the family threw a party, she'd listen to the music from the servants' quarters, imagining what it felt like to belong. But belonging was a luxury she couldn't afford. That seed of inferiority took root deep inside her, and once it grew, it wrapped around everything, her confidence, her dreams, her sense of worth. She started believing that love wasn't for people like her, that no one would ever see past her mother's apron, that being born into the wrong side of the house meant she'd never be seen as equal. And in those quiet moments when no one watched, Emily cried, not loud sobs, but silent tears, the kind that stain your pillow and your identity, the kind that whisper, "You'll never be enough." It wasn't just about money. It was about value, about feeling like a mistake in a world of perfection. And it stayed with her through every teenage year, every broken friendship, every time someone asked, "Wait, aren't you the maid's daughter?" Her story began with a quiet suffering, the kind people ignore, the kind that makes you question your own worth. And slowly, the cracks began to form. But even in that silence, something inside Emily refused to give up. She didn't know it then, but those hidden scars would one day tell a story of strength, of survival, of a love so unlikely it would shake both worlds, because the girl no one saw was about to be seen. Pain has a way of finding those who feel invisible. For Emily, rejection wasn't just a moment, it became a pattern. As she grew older, the emotional wounds from her childhood deepened. She began searching for something, anything, that would numb the ache. It started with alcohol at small parties. Then came pills, handed to her by people who said, "Just take it, it'll help you forget." And she wanted so badly to forget. Every time she looked in the mirror, she didn't see herself. She saw the shame, the abandonment, the labels stamped on her by a world that never gave her a chance. Nights became heavier. Her room turned into a prison of silence and pain. She stopped caring about the future. She stopped believing she deserved one. The addiction didn't come like a storm. It came like a whisper. Gentle, deceptive, deadly. Emily thought she was in control, but the truth? The addiction was controlling her. She started lying, disappearing for days, selling things just to feed a need she couldn't explain. She wasn't chasing a high. She was running from a history. A childhood of being overlooked, a young woman aching to be loved, but convinced she never would be. And in that belief, the darkness wrapped tighter around her soul. Her mother cried, begged, prayed, but nothing worked. Emily pushed everyone away. She wasn't trying to be cruel. She was drowning. She didn't want anyone to see her like that. Not when her hands were shaking, her face pale, her body exhausted. She hid because shame whispered that she was a failure. And shame is louder than love when you've never known love without judgment. At her lowest, Emily wandered streets she never imagined she'd sleep on. Cold benches became beds. Broken sidewalks became her path. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but the deeper pain was in her heart. She had dreams once, big ones. But dreams don't survive when you feel invisible. And in those sleepless nights under the stars, she began to believe the lie. Maybe I was never meant to be anything more than broken. She had overdoses, times when her heart almost stopped. But somehow, she woke up. Each time more numb, more tired. She didn't want to live like that, but she didn't know how to stop. No one saw the little girl inside still crying. All they saw was another addict on the street, another statistic, another story people walk past with their eyes down, pretending not to notice. But pain has a strange way of leading us to turning points. Sometimes it breaks us so deeply that the only way left is up. And for Emily, even in that darkness, a tiny spark still flickered. A piece of her that hadn't given up. She didn't know it yet, but someone from her past was about to see her again. Not the addict, not the broken girl, but the soul behind the scars. Ryan had everything most people dream of. Mansions with marble floors, luxury cars, exotic vacations. From the outside, his life looked like a movie. But no one ever talks about how lonely the main character can feel when the script lacks meaning. Every morning, he woke up surrounded by wealth, yet inside, something was missing. Not money, not fame, but something deeper. Purpose. He was the heir to an empire, People respected his last name before even meeting him, but that respect felt hollow. At business meetings, everyone agreed with him, not because he was right, but because he was rich. At parties, he was always smiling, but it was a mask. Behind the champagne toasts and designer suits, Ryan felt like he was slowly disappearing, being seen by everyone, but truly known by no one. His parents loved him, but in their own way. Love was measured in credit limits, not conversations. Success was expected, but never celebrated. There were no hugs, only headlines. No dinners at the table, only takeout in silence. He learned to smile in pictures and ache in private. The wealth gave him everything, except someone who cared about how he was really doing. At night, when the world went quiet, he'd sit on the balcony of his penthouse and stare into the city lights. So many lives moving below, people with struggles, emotions, real stories, and he envied them, because despite their chaos, their lives had something his didn't. Authenticity. Ryan longed for something real, something that couldn't be bought, a reason to breathe beyond survival. He tried filling the void with everything money could buy, cars, watches, jets, but none of it healed the silence that screamed in his soul. Relationships? Temporary. Most people wanted his lifestyle, not his heart. And slowly, he began to believe a painful lie. Maybe that's all I'm good for. To be seen, envied, but never truly loved. His soul was starving while his wallet stayed full. He started drifting, showing up late to meetings, skipping events, ignoring calls. Not because he didn't care, but because he couldn't pretend anymore. He was exhausted, not physically, but emotionally. Imagine standing in a crowd and still feeling utterly alone. That was his daily reality. His house was filled with art, yet lacked warmth. His life had luxury, yet no color. One night, he visited an old part of town. No cameras, no drivers, just him and silence. He watched people laughing around a fire, sharing food, even if it was little. Emma turned her face quickly, ashamed of what she had become. But Ryan didn't move. Something inside him was shaking. He couldn't walk away. Not this time. He slowly approached her, cautious not to scare her off. "Emma," he whispered, almost afraid she wouldn't remember him. Her lip trembled. "Ryan," she said, barely above a whisper. And there it was, the collision of two worlds that were never supposed to meet again. A millionaire and a broken soul bound by an invisible past. Emma tried to retreat. Shame wrapped around her like a blanket soaked in cold rain. She hadn't looked in a mirror for weeks. Her clothes hung loosely from her thin frame. She smelled like old sweat and lost days. But Ryan didn't flinch. He saw past it. He saw the pain, the silent scream in her eyes. And for the first time in years, his heart beat differently. People walked by without noticing them, but to Ryan, the world had narrowed to this moment. He didn't see the street anymore. He saw a memory. A girl who once wore kindness like a second skin, now drowning in the weight of her scars. And all he could think was, how did she get here? And more importantly, how can I get her out? Emma didn't ask for anything. No money, no sympathy. She just wanted to disappear. But something in Ryan's presence stirred a memory inside her too. A warmth she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was recognition, not of who they were, but of who they used to be and what they might still become. He offered to buy her a meal. She said no. He insisted. She resisted. But hunger spoke louder than pride. They sat in a small diner, two worlds colliding over stale coffee and old fries. She barely ate. He barely blinked, and when she finally looked him in the eyes, it was like asking a question without words. Why do you care? Ryan didn't have an answer. All he knew was that he couldn't ignore her. Not anymore. This wasn't charity. This wasn't guilt. This was something else. Something bigger. Something sacred. The universe doesn't make mistakes. Sometimes it just takes its time to bring the right people back together. And deep down, they both felt it. Something had just begun. Emma couldn't sleep that night. Even after the warm meal and the awkward kindness, shame crawled under her skin like thorns. She hated the way Ryan had looked at her, not because he judged her, but because he didn't. That made it worse. Because kindness like that exposes the places where we're still bleeding, and Emma was still bleeding, inside and out. She avoided his calls for days. He sent messages, gentle ones. Just checking in. You okay? No pressure. And still she couldn't answer. Because she didn't believe she was worthy of concern. Years of rejection had taught her to see herself as damaged goods, unworthy of affection or help. Shame whispers louder than truth when you've listened to it for too long. Ryan, on the other hand, was patient. He didn't chase her down, didn't make grand gestures. He just waited. He knew that when people carry trauma, the worst thing you can do is rush them. So he became a quiet presence, consistent, gentle, real. Not trying to rescue her, but to remind her she wasn't invisible. Not anymore. Emma finally answered on the 4th day. Her voice was flat. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. And Ryan answered with a truth that shook her. "Because I see you. Not who you are now, but who you are underneath it all." And that broke something inside her, because no one had ever said that before. No one had ever tried. She agreed to meet again, cautiously, nervously. This time, she let him ask questions about where she'd been, what had happened, how the addiction started. And slowly, word by word, Emma let him into the dark. She told him about the nights sleeping under bridges, the fear of being assaulted, the hunger, the withdrawals, the shame, the silence. Ryan didn't interrupt. He didn't react with horror. He just listened. And when she finished, he said something that didn't feel like pity. It felt like truth. "You've survived things most people wouldn't. You're stronger than you think." That sentence echoed in her chest like a melody from a forgotten song. For the first time, she considered the idea that she wasn't just broken, she was still alive. Still, Emma wasn't ready to be saved. She pushed back often. She snapped. She canceled plans. She doubted everything. Part of her believed Ryan would eventually walk away, just like everyone else had. And yet, he didn't. Each time she fell silent, he stayed present. Each time she tried to disappear, he gently reached out again. No pressure, no expectations, just care. The world around them didn't make sense of this connection. People whispered. Ryan's friends questioned his sanity. "Why waste your time on her?" they asked. But he didn't see her as a project. He didn't see her as a mistake. He saw her as a soul, fighting to remember its worth. And he knew that if she couldn't believe in herself yet, he could believe enough for both of them. Day by day, Emma began to let the light in, a little at a time. And although she still battled the voice that said she wasn't enough, another voice was beginning to rise, a quieter one that whispered, maybe, just maybe, this is the beginning of something new, something worth fighting for. Emma agreed to enter rehab, but it wasn't hope that led her there. It was exhaustion. A part of her wanted to believe change was possible, but most of her was still numb. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and sadness. Detox wasn't romantic. It was pain, shaking, crying, screaming, and memories she'd tried to bury coming back like ghosts. Ryan visited her every day. He wasn't allowed to stay long, but even 10 minutes of his calm presence grounded her. He didn't show up with balloons or promises. He brought books, warm coffee, or silence. He sat beside her on her worst days and didn't flinch when she lashed out. That's how you love someone through recovery. You stay, even when it's messy. Emma relapsed twice. The second time, she disappeared for 48 hours. When Ryan found her, barefoot and trembling near a bus stop, she screamed at him to leave. "You can't fix me," she cried. And he answered, "I'm not trying to fix you. I'm just not going to give up on you." That kind of love, steady, undeserved, unshakable, was foreign to her. Recovery is not a straight line. It's a war between who you've been and who you're becoming. Some days, Emma felt like a fraud. The staff at the center encouraged her, but it was Ryan's faith in her that slowly planted new beliefs. Not just that she could get better, but that she was worth saving. There were moments of light. One afternoon, Emma laughed so freely during a therapy session that everyone stopped and looked. It had been years since anyone had heard that sound from her. It startled her too. But it was a crack in the darkness, a reminder that the soul remembers how to smile, even after everything. They started writing letters. Ryan told her stories about his childhood, his fears, his moments of emptiness, even in a life of wealth. Emma responded with sketches, poems, fragments of herself that she hadn't shared in years. In those exchanges, something bloomed. Not just affection, but understanding. Not just care, but connection. Some nights were brutal. Emma would curl into herself, sobbing over things she could barely articulate, like the sound of her mother crying quietly while cleaning rich people's bathrooms. Or the way she was once locked out of the mansion because someone forgot she was there. Ryan didn't try to explain it away. He simply held space for her truth. Each step forward felt fragile, but it was real. She began to volunteer at the center, helped newcomers find their footing, shared her story in bits and pieces, and the more she gave, the more she received. Her healing wasn't just personal, it was collective. She was part of something now, needed, seen. Emma wasn't fully healed yet, but something fundamental had changed. She was no longer drowning alone, she was walking toward the shore. And at the edge of that shoreline, Ryan stood, not as her rescuer, but as her reminder that even in the ugliest battles, love doesn't retreat. It fights with you, and it stays. There's a moment in recovery when silence gets louder than pain. That's when real healing begins. For Emma, it started on a rainy afternoon during a group session. A therapist asked her to talk about her earliest memory of rejection. Her hands trembled, her voice cracked, but she said it. Being called the maid's daughter, like that's all I'd ever be. That confession opened a floodgate. Emma began to talk about being left out of birthday parties held just a few feet away in the garden, about the way rich guests looked through her, not at her, about how when she cried in silence behind the kitchen door, no one came, not once. That's not just loneliness. That's the kind of abandonment that sticks to your bones. She spoke of her mother, too, kind, gentle, exhausted, a woman who worked 3 jobs just to keep her daughter in schools. Emma had never blamed her, but she hated how invisible they both were. Her mom you'd say, "We're lucky to be here," but Emma knew the truth. They weren't guests in that house. They were ghosts. Ryan listened to every word like it was sacred. He never interrupted. Never said, "I'm sorry," in that flat, useless way most people do. Instead, he looked her in the eyes and said, "You were never invisible to me." That broke her, not because it was poetic, but because it was true. Someone had seen her, even back then. As she processed more, Emma realized she had been carrying shame that wasn't hers. The shame of poverty, the shame of being less, the shame of addiction, of failure, of not being enough for the world she grew up around. And that's what trauma does. It tricks you into believing that your pain is your fault. But shame loses its grip when it's named. She started journaling daily, writing letters to her younger self. In one, she wrote, "You were never the problem. You were just a little girl who needed love." These weren't just words, they were salves. Each sentence peeled away a scar and revealed soft, new skin beneath. With time, Emma began to embrace parts of herself she had buried. She painted again, sang softly when no one was listening, went on long walks and noticed sunlight on leaves. These small, sacred acts were her way of reclaiming a life stolen by years of silence. Healing isn't loud. It's slow, gentle, brave. She forgave people, not because they deserved it, but because she did. Holding on to bitterness kept her anchored to the past, and Emma was finally ready to sail forward. The more she let go of what hurt her, the more space she made for what could heal her. Forgiveness wasn't weakness, it was freedom. And Ryan never rushed her, never demanded milestones. He simply walked beside her. And in that quiet, patient presence, Emma discovered something she had never truly known: safety. For the first time in her life, she wasn't surviving. She was living. And life was just getting started. Healing doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives in silence, like the first morning you wake up and realize you didn't cry yourself to sleep. Emma had that moment, a simple day, no big event, just peace. For the first time, she felt something she hadn't in years: hope. And with hope came possibility. She started volunteering at the same rehab center that once saved her, helping other women who felt just as invisible as she once did. And in every trembling voice, in every shaky smile, she saw pieces of herself. Her story was no longer a source of shame. It became her power, her redemption, her way of saying, "You can get up too." Ryan noticed the change before she did. The way her eyes carried light again, the softness in her voice, the steadiness in her steps. He didn't say much, just held her hand and listened to her laugh, something he hadn't heard in months. And it wasn't forced. It was real, pure, the sound of a soul returning home. They began spending time together not as savior and survivor, but as two people rebuilding. There were coffee shop conversations, walks by the lake, long talks under the stars. They talked about dreams, fears, the kind of home they never had. And somewhere between the silences, love slipped in. Quiet, unannounced, but undeniable. Emma hesitated at first. Love felt like a risk. What if she wasn't enough? What if her scars scared him away? But Ryan didn't flinch. He never asked her to erase the past. He only asked to walk beside her as she built a new future. That kind of love doesn't shout. It doesn't rush. It simply stays. She began to believe again, not just in him, but in herself, that she could build a life, that she could love and be loved, that broken doesn't mean unworthy, that after every fall, there's a rising, and in her rise, she found something deeper than recovery. She found resurrection. They laughed more, cooked together, danced barefoot in the kitchen, made plans, real plans, things she never let herself imagine before, college classes, a future home, a little garden. It wasn't about luxury. It was about life, the kind of life that blooms after the storm clears. People around them began to notice not just the love, but the transformation. The same girl once dismissed as the maid's daughter was now a force, radiant, grounded. And next to her was a man who chose love over status, heart over image. Their bond wasn't born out of fantasy, but out of fire. And still, Emma knew the world hadn't forgotten her past. But now, she didn't care. She had turned her scars into bridges, her wounds into wisdom, her survival into strength. And in the arms of someone who saw her worth before she did, Emma wasn't just healed, she was whole. She was beautiful. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. Why her? Doesn't he know who she was? She'll never fit into his world. The same society that praised Ryan for charity work now judged him for loving a woman they considered unworthy. But Ryan didn't flinch. He'd seen the truth behind the labels, and he wasn't turning back. Emma walked beside him with her head held high, but she felt the stares, the judgment, the cold glances from people who once ignored her completely, now glaring because she stood where they believed she didn't belong. It hurt, yes, but it didn't crush her. She was no longer the girl who needed approval to feel whole. Ryan's own family raised eyebrows. Some warned him, some pleaded, "You're risking everything for her." But he knew better. He wasn't risking, he was choosing. Choosing love over lineage, purpose over pretense. And the woman who once lived in shadows now stood boldly in his light, not as a project, but as a partner. They didn't waste energy explaining. They just lived, side by side, rebuilding a new definition of success. It wasn't about mansions or headlines anymore. It was about meaning. Quiet dinners, real conversations, a relationship rooted in grace, not gossip. They became an answer to their critics just by existing. Emma started sharing her story, not for validation, but to empower others. She spoke at recovery events, mentored young girls who felt less than. Her voice, once buried under trauma, became a tool of transformation. And Ryan, he was always there, applauding from the sidelines, smiling like a proud witness. The media tried to twist their love into a scandal. From Maid's daughter to millionaire's fiancé, headlines screamed. But the truth was gentler, deeper. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a war story with a love victory. And they weren't ashamed of the battle. The blood made the victory sweeter. Together, they broke rules society had written in stone, that the rich don't mix with the broken, that women with pasts don't get futures, that love must be equal in pedigree. They shattered all of it. With every step, they rewrote what it meant to be worthy of love, of dignity, of a second chance. And slowly, the world adjusted. Some hearts softened, some eyes opened. People who once doubted began to believe again, in change, in mercy, in miracles. Because when love wins, it's not just the couple who's transformed, it's everyone watching. And many watched Emma and Ryan rise from ashes into light. So no, they didn't prove everyone wrong with words. They did it with truth, with tenderness, with a love that healed 2 lives and inspired 1,000 more. Emma wasn't the maid's daughter anymore. She was a warrior, a lover, a woman reborn. And Ryan, he wasn't just a millionaire. He was the man who believed in miracles. The garden hadn't changed much. The same trimmed hedges, the same roses blooming along the path. But this time, Emma wasn't carrying a tray or wiping windows. She was barefoot on the grass, wearing a white sundress, eyes glowing. For the first time, this place didn't whisper, "You don't belong." It embraced her. Ryan had planned nothing extravagant. No orchestras, no crowds. Just them, the breeze, and a little box he held in his trembling hand. It wasn't the ring that made the moment magical. It was the journey that led to it. Every scar, every fight, every tear brought them right here, face to face with forever. He took her hand and didn't rush. He looked into her eyes and smiled softly. "I've loved you for a long time," he said. "Not just the healed parts, but every broken piece, every part you tried to hide. I saw it all, and I still chose you." Her breath caught. Her heart raced. This was real. Emma didn't need a fairy tale. She'd lived through storms. She'd faced demons. But this was the miracle no rehab could promise. The love no dollar could buy. A moment where she wasn't the daughter of the maid. She was the center of the universe for a man who had everything, but only felt full with her. When he got on one knee, time slowed down. "Will you marry me?" 4 simple words, yet they held the weight of redemption, grace, and destiny. She didn't answer with words at first, just tears, happy tears, healing tears. Then finally, a nod. A yes, whispered through trembling lips. Heaven must have heard. They held each other like survivors, not perfect, not polished, but real, complete, chosen. Emma wasn't the same girl who wandered broken down alleyways, begging for hope. She was a woman who'd reclaimed her name, her dignity, her voice, and now her future. That garden became holy ground, not because of the flowers, but because of what bloomed in their hearts. Love, redemption, a promise not just between 2 people, but between pain and healing, past and future. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, their story didn't end. It finally began. How many people out there are silently waiting to be seen? How many Emmas are walking through life feeling like they're just background characters in someone else's story? Maybe you felt that too, invisible, unworthy, like love and redemption are things for others, not for you. But what if I told you, your past doesn't disqualify you, it qualifies you to be part of something even greater? That the very scars you try to hide might be the reason someone chooses to stay. This isn't just Emma's story, it's a mirror, a reminder that no matter where you come from, you're not too broken to be loved. What did this story awaken in you? Did you see yourself in Emma's silence? In Ryan's emptiness? Or maybe in the courage it takes to fight for someone who's given up on themselves? Let this be more than a story. Let it be your wake-up call. Ask yourself, what story am I living right now? Am I letting shame define me? Am I afraid to receive love because I think I don't deserve it? Or worse, am I pushing people away because I've forgotten how to believe in myself? Don't let the voices of judgment speak louder than your purpose. Don't let society write your ending. You're not what they called you. You are not your past. You are not your scars. You are someone's miracle in the making. If this story touched you, if it stirred something deep in your soul, then don't keep it to yourself. Comment below. Tell me what part of this hit you the hardest. Share this video with someone who needs hope today. And most of all, subscribe. Because this channel was created for people like you. People who've been overlooked. People who've been hurt, but who still believe, even if just a little, that something greater is coming. Turn on the notifications. Stay with us, because your story is still being written. And believe me, the best chapter is yet to come.